Hi everybody, my name is Molly. I'm from the Uplift Center for Grieving Children, and I want to read a book to you today that is called Cry Heart, But Never Break. It is written by a Danish author named Glenn Ringtved and illustrated by Charlotte Pardi. In the far north, in a small, snug house, 4 children lived with their beloved grandmother. A kindly woman, she had cared for them for many years. Now, she had a visitor. Not wishing to frighten the children, the visitor had left his scythe outside the door. All the time they knew it was death. Nels, the oldest, and his sister Sonia closed their eyes, heavy with sorrow. Casper, who was younger, tried to ignore the visitor. But Leah, the youngest, who was always getting into trouble, stared straight at death. In the quiet, the children could hear their grandmother upstairs, breathing with the same raspy breaths as the figure at the table. They knew death had come for her, and that time was short. Since everyone knows death's only friend is night, the children quickly made a plan. They would keep death away from their grandmother by giving him coffee all through the night. At dawn, he would have no choice but to leave without her. So every time Death emptied his cup, Nels would ask, "More coffee, sir?" And Death would nod. Death loved his coffee strong and black like the night, and he was happy to sit and rest for a while. Time passed. Finally, Death was ready. He placed his bony hand over his cup to signal, "No more." Then Leah, who had been watching Death all night, reached out and took his hand. "Oh, Death," she said, "our grandmother is so dear to us. Why does she have to die?" Some people say Death's heart is as dead and black as a piece of coal, but that is not true. Beneath his inky cloak, Death's heart is as red as the most beautiful sunset, and beats with a great love of life. Death wanted to help the children understand, so he said, "I would like to tell you a story." And in a strong, sweet voice he began to speak. "Once upon a time, so long ago that only I can remember, there lived 2 brothers. One was called Sorrow, the other, Grief. Woeful and sad, they moved up and down their gloomy valley. They went slowly and heavily, and because they never looked up, they never saw through the shadows to the tops of the hills." What do you think is at the tops of the hills? At the top of those hills there lived 2 sisters, Joy and Delight. They were bright and sunny, and their days were full of happiness. The only shadow was their sense that something was missing. They didn't know what, but they felt they couldn't fully enjoy their happiness. Death saw Leah nodding and said, "I think you can guess what happened next." What do you think happens next? One day the brothers and the sisters met. Sorrow fell instantly in love with Delight, and she with him. It was the same for Grief and Joy. Each couldn't live without the other. After their double wedding and a great celebration, the 2 couples moved into neighboring houses, halfway up and halfway down the hill. This way the distance to their old homes was the same. They all lived to be very old. When the time came to die, Grief and Joy did so on the same day, as did Sorrow and Delight. Their happiness together had been so great that they couldn't live without each other. "That's a good story," said Nels. "It is the same with life and death," said Death. "What would life be worth if there were no death? Who would enjoy the sun if it never rained? Who would yearn for day if there were no night?" The children weren't sure that they had understood Death fully, but somehow they knew that he was right. At last Death stood up. It was time to go upstairs. A line of pale gray was edging away the night. Casper wanted to stop Death, but Nels held him back. No, Nels said. Life is moving on. This is how it must be. Moments later, the children heard the upstairs window open. Then, in a voice somewhere between a cry and a whisper, Death said, Fly, soul. Fly. Fly away. The children hurried upstairs. They tiptoed into their grandmother's room. Grandmother had died. The curtains were blowing in the gentle morning breeze. Looking at the children, Death said quietly, Cry, heart, but never break. Let your tears of grief and sadness help begin new life. Then he was gone. Ever after, whenever the children opened a window, they would think of their grandmother, and when the breeze caressed their faces, they could feel her touch. In the years that followed, the children lived with their joy and their sorrow, but they always remembered Death's words and took great comfort from their hearts, which grieved and cried, but never broke. That's the end of the book, Cry, Heart, But Never Break. So I hope you'll just sit with that story. See what it means to you, if it rings true. And I hope you enjoyed the reading. Take care, Uplifters.